Well, I'm going to have us use our imaginations tonight. We're going to go back to the year of 1866, back in the days of the Old West. There were some cowboys in Texas, ranchers. The price of beef in Texas had gotten very low. There's no way to make any money. There were some who took 3 months or so, 4 months, drove their cattle all the way to California because they could get 20 times the price they could get anywhere else. There were some cowboys that drove their cattle up the Sedalia Trail, up to Sedalia, Missouri. There were those who used the Western Trail, took them to Ogallala, Nebraska. Then there was the Chisholm Trail that went to Abilene, Kansas. Well, there was a couple of fellows by the name of Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving. They'd become real good, close friends. Decided they'd put their cattle together and they'd go a different way than everybody else did. They were going to drive them across into New Mexico, up along the foothills, up to Denver to the railhead there. They had about 2,000 head of cattle between the two of them. They put together, began to gather up horses for the cowboys that they would hire. They needed anywhere between 8 to 10 horses per cowboy. Seems like a lot of horses for each cowboy, but when you figure the dangers along the trail, when a horse got hurt, there was nothing to do but to put that horse down, didn't have time to nurse it. They had to keep moving. Mr. Goodnight was the one who invented the chuckwagon. He knew he had to feed his cowboys, knew he needed a place for the cook to be able to take care of them and prepare the meals. So he designed that with his cook. He designed the chuckwagon, put those compartments in the back to put all the spices and different things. And not only that, but the chuckwagon normally took care of carrying the cowboys' bedrolls as well. And they would put those in there and do all of that. And they hired about 18 cowboys. They decided that, like I said, to come across, they was going to use the old Butterfield stage line trail. It was longer, but it was safer. But still, even at that, there was Indians that had to be fought. There were Mexican bandits that came up from Mexico that had to be fought. And so it was a dangerous proposition, driving cattle, not to mention the fact, just the cattle themselves. 2,000 head of cattle would stretch as much as 2 miles because they'd take them in a small file to keep them together. Took a lot of cowboys to do that. The trail boss, he got about $100 to $125 a month. The cook make about $60 a month. Then they called them $30 a month men. That was the cowboy. That's what he made. Take about 2 months to drive the cattle from Texas across into New Mexico up to Denver. Had to come over Raton Pass, and in there, coming over Raton Pass, there was a man there by the name of Wooten. He wanted to get in on the action as well. He charged 10 cents a head. He set up a toll road up there. Well, needless to say, that was the last time that Mr. Goodnight came over Raton Pass. He took a different trail from there on in. As they were coming across Texas into New Mexico, they came to Fort Sumner. At Fort Sumner, there was a cavalry troop there guarding about 800 Mescalero Indians, 8,000 Navajos, not to mention themselves. They needed beef. They needed to feed them. So they sold most of their herd to that troop. Made about $12,000 off of that deal. The rest of the cattle, they began to drive on up over Raton Pass, up through Pueblo, Colorado Springs, up into Denver. Normally along the trail, if a calf was born, they just put it down. Didn't have time to nursemaid them. had to keep moving. But as time went by on some of the trail drives, Mr. Goodnight found out that calves began to be worth money. So he built a wagon that hold about 40 cows, 40 little calves. And they would put those calves in there, and he put them in sacks. Because he found out if you put them all in there together, their scent would mix up with each other, and Mama cow didn't know which one was hers. So he'd put them in bags, and he'd number those bags, mark them. So it kept their scent separate. So that when they took them out at night, they'd go to the right mama cow. That calf would feed, and he'd make money off of them once he got to the trailhead as well as with the other cattle. Well, as we began driving them up toward Denver, Mr. Loving said, well, I'll go on into Denver. I'll talk to the cattle buyers. I'll try to get the best price we can, try to beat the other herds in. Mr. Goodnight said, well, I'll drive them on up here into this canyon. You heard about Jar Canyon. They knew it was a good place. The grass in this canyon that grows slow in the mountains, and it's full of nutrients. Thought we'd bed them down here for a week or two, maybe, just to fatten them up so we can get more money out of them. As they began to come up the canyon, drive them up the canyon, up to these mountain meadows, they heard a mountain lion scream. Well, they fought Indians, probably fought stampedes, fought rainstorms, fought dust storms, dry periods, maybe dried up water holes. It had been a difficult drive. And as they brought those cattle up, those cattle heard that mountain lion scream. The cowboys heard it as well. As they began to try to bed them down, they just kept milling around because those cattle were nervous. There was always a cowboy had either a guitar or a harmonica. He'd reach in his saddlebag, pull that out, begin to softly play it. Some of the other night riders would begin to sing or hum. And that music began to settle those cattle down. They quit milling around. They began to bed down. And they get quiet and still. Meanwhile, back in the camp, the cook has fixed up some beef, maybe some bison, some taters, some beans, hot coffee, some sourdough biscuits. Cowboys had gathered around, they've eaten their meal. They're sitting there finishing their coffee, maybe talking about how glad they are that they're at the end of the trail. Can't wait to collect their wages and head back home to Texas. And as they're sitting there, they hear a lone rider coming up the canyon, because that sound travels. They all reached over and took the tie down off their 6-gun, put their hand on their pistol, wondering, is that a bandit? Is there an Indian coming? And as they got closer, one of the cowboys said, well, that looks like a circuit riding preacher. Got a long black frock coat on, big black hat. Sure enough, as he got closer, they recognized him as a preacher. One of the cowboys jumped up, waved him on into the camp, grabbed his horse, asked him to get on down. He said, Parson, have you had anything to eat? He said, well, I've been living on jerky and hardtack for about a week. He said, well, going over there to the chuckwagon, the cook will fix you up with some food. So he went over and got a plate of food, poured him a cup of hot coffee, sat down and began to eat his meal. Those cowboys just sat there and watched him as he ate. When he got done, he took that sleeve of that old coat, wiped his mouth. The cowboys in those days, one of the things I read is about 2/3 of them were Christians, not like what you see on the TV westerns. They loved the Lord. One of those cowboys said, Parson, We've been on the trail for a couple of months now. Haven't heard any good preaching. Do you have a word for us? And that old preacher said, sure. Walked over to his horse, opened up his saddlebag, reached down inside and pulled out a big old black Bible. Came over, his cowboys sit down. Out of honor to the man of God, they took their cowboy hats off and listened to him preach the Word of God. Preacher, you got a word for us? Our circuit riding preacher comes all the way from everywhere.